Is it worth it to craft Cloud, Midgar Mercenary, and the rest of Boros equipment? That's the question I'm going to try to answer today. Alright, if you've kept up with my last few videos, you'll know that I've been playing a ton of Boros equipment, and you know what? I'm at a point with the deck that I think I can confidently say that this build that I have right now is the build that I'm going to continue playing for quite some time. The deck is super fun, the deck has a lot of power to it, however it is not without its weaknesses and drawbacks. And so, let's cut to the chase. Do I recommend crafting Cloud, Midgar Mercenary, and some of the other new equipment cards that are going into this Hammer Time shell that came out in the Final Fantasy set? It has been a few weeks. Are you ready to craft them? And initially my answer was yes. However, I think I have gone to the other side and I've decided to recommend that you should definitely hold off on crafting any of these cards, simply because although the deck is fun, it is incredibly vulnerable, and Pioneer is a format that seems to feast on a deck like this. Everybody is running so much removal, and even though we have appropriate protection for our creatures, there's so many ways to get around it in Pioneer right now. As far as Standard goes, well, these cards really haven't found a place in Standard yet. There is a ban announcement coming up on the 30th, I believe, 30th of June, and there's also the summer rotation that is coming for Standard. It is possible, I believe very likely, that at that time equipment decks will find a place in Standard, and at that time, if you are bouncing between Standard and Pioneer, and you like Hammer Time, then absolutely go ahead and craft some of these cards. But as it is right now, as cool as Cloud is, as powerful as Cloud is, I'm not going to recommend that you craft Cloud or Raban or the Buster Sword or any of these other Boros equipment cards that have just recently come out. That being said, if you do really like Hammer Time and you are invested in Hammer Time, you already have Sigarda's Aids, you already have your Leyline Axes, and you are looking for a fun deck, it is fun and you will have a lot of enjoyment and you will be able to tailor this deck to your unique playstyle. So I do think there is some value to be found in this deck. Anyways, like I said, I think I have my final build, or 99% build here. I'm going to go over it one final time so I can put Boros equipment to rest finally. So let's check out some of these cards. And of course, first we have to start off with the creatures. There are 6 creatures in the deck, 3 of which are from the new Final Fantasy set. You know that. We're going to start off with Cloud, Midgar Mercenary. Although Cloud is a bit of a lightning rod, he is an absolute powerhouse in the deck. I think initially a lot of people were going after his double trigger ability. However, that's the ability that I found myself not really using that much. To be perfectly honest, in a 60 card format, that second ability just doesn't trigger. What really makes Cloud an awesome card is the fact that it is a 2/1 body for 2 CMC that has a tutor for an equipment. The amount of times that this has been useful to me in games is countless. You get Cloud out on the field, they have to deal with it, and you go and get those awesome key pieces of equipment that you can follow up on the next turn. Cloud, I think, is going to find a place in the majority of equipment-based decks and in Hammer Time decks. This is a card that's super awesome and super powerful. It's just unfortunate that it's fitting into an archetype that is a little bit weak right now. Next up is an obvious one, it's Raban. We can cheat our big equipment cards onto our creatures with this. He also self-protects himself and becomes a threat that is really hard for your opponents to deal with. The last Final Fantasy card is Freya, a 1-drop mana generating all-star. Now, some decks have opted to pass on Freya, however, I think the mana that this card produces is absolutely invaluable. The deck is fairly low to the ground, but at times it is very mana hungry. So getting that extra point of mana that we can use for equipping or playing out equipment cards is often huge. The next creature is by far the strongest creature in the deck, in my opinion, and that is the Fervent Champion. This card is such a powerhouse and can actually win the game on turn 3 with the right equipment in the deck. The fact that it has a reduced equipment cost ability and haste makes this thing an immediate threat that the opponent has to answer. And if they aren't able to answer it, it's not uncommon for this Fervent Champion to be swinging in as a 3/3 double striker or more from very early turns. You have to play Fervent Champion when you are playing a Hammer Time deck, in my opinion. Skrelv is a good source of protection, however, I think it's one of the weaker cards in the deck, and it tends to just draw out your opponent's first bit of removal rather than actually protecting your field. At times, it does prove itself to be very valuable, however, I often found myself sideboarding Skrelv out in games 2 and 3. This is a flex spot, and you can fill it however you want. The final creature is Kellen the Fey-Blooded. This was one of the creatures that I added last to the deck. Birthright Boon, Kellen's Adventureside, is an excellent tutor when you can't seem to find Cloud. In addition to that, he is a 2/2 double striking creature, which comes in handy when things are going a bit rough. However, I found myself mostly using this for the Birthright Boon side of the card. I think 2 copies are all you need for this card in this deck. Alright, moving away from the creatures, next up is a card that I believe is a non-negotiable in this deck, and that is Sigarda's Aid. To my surprise, some equipment decks are not running Sigarda's Aid, and I find that absolutely wild. Games when you have Sigarda's Aid on turn 1 go so much more smoothly than games when you don't have it. And sure, sometimes it gets removed, but when it's on the field for just a few turns, the impact is already felt, and this card tends to overwhelm your opponent very quickly. So I think having 4 copies of Sigarda's Aid is a must. And of course, if we're talking Sigarda's Aid, that means we have to have 4 Colossus Hammers. It is a hammer time deck. There's not much to say about this one. It's 10 damage for 1 mana. Run this one. If you don't have Sigarda's Aid on the field, Raban is a great way to equip it, and Fervent Champion can often find a way to equip it with its reduced equipment cost ability. We are still running 4 copies of Dragonfire Blade. I believe wholeheartedly in this card. It does provide a nice bit of protection for our valuable creatures. Now, it is not a blanket protection card because it only provides protection from mono-colored spells. And unfortunately, in Pioneer, there are plenty of ways for your opponent to deal with this, either through edict effects or through multicolor cards like Vanishing Verse or Assassin's Trophy. Trust me, there are so many, and your opponents seem to have them in their deck. It's crazy. But still, this card tends to be one of the cards that I tutor for most often, and it does tend to win a lot of games for me. Next, a single copy of Shadow Spear. It provides some much needed trample and lifelink for a pretty cheap cost. One more Shadow Spear is over in the sideboard for those matches where lifelink is absolutely necessary. I think the argument could be made for having 2 Shadow Spears in the main board because this card is such a powerhouse. Next, I've gone down to 3 copies of Corey Steelcutter. Now, this card is obviously awesome. It's a very cheap cost card. It provides a little bit of power, trample, and haste to our creatures. But the main reason we're running this is to generate a few creatures to keep on the board because, truthfully, it is a little bit hard to keep creatures on the board in Pioneer. Oftentimes, I found myself loading up these monks with our equipment cards and swinging in for a win. There are also 3 copies of Leyline Axe at the top end for our equipment. Double Strike and Trample will simply win a lot of games with just 1 more equipment card. This axe is a beautiful thing to see in your opening hand, especially if you have a Fervent Champion on turn 1, which equips the axe for free. It might be a little bit awkward drawing it later on in the game, but that is a fine price to pay for the power that this card provides. Next up are our lands. We are hurting ourselves a bit with our land base, but it is very important for our lands to be coming in untapped and providing enough white mana and red mana so that we can cast turn 1 red spells along with turn 2 double white spells. This is a big mana requirement and it can be a little bit awkward at times. However, with the mana base the way it is, we can pay a little bit of life and usually overcome this problem. Plaza of Heroes is the unique land that I want to mention in the deck. It is a kind of unique card, but with the amount of legends that we are running in the deck, it is an all-star. Over in the sideboard, we are packing some tech for our difficult matchups. We are now running Rest in Peace over Tormod's Crypt, which didn't provide quite enough impact to stop graveyard decks. We're also running 3 copies of Deafening Silence to slow down our combo deck opponents like Lotus Field and our Phoenix opponents. 2 copies of Sheltered by Ghost work really well against those decks that have a hard time dealing with lifelink and Ward 2. It also acts as a removal spell. This is an all-star against mono red opponents much of the time. Chainsaw is a tutorable removal spell for our deck. 3 damage is often enough to kill most troublesome creatures, and in those matchups where a lot of creatures are dying, this card quickly gets out of control and provides a big attack very fast. 3 copies of Get Lost is a way for us to fight back against Azorius Control, one of our toughest matchups in my opinion. It takes out your opponent's temporary lockdowns and allows you to get back into a game that may have seemed impossible to win otherwise. And there is a 4th copy of the Corey Steelcutter in the sideboard that can come in against those really grindy matchups, because it is a card that the opponents do have a hard time dealing with, as it just keeps recurring threats over and over again. So this is the full breakdown of the deck. This is where we're at. Now that you've seen the deck, what do you think? Will you be trying out Boros equipment? Let me know what you think in the comments.